In the heart of New York City, where skyscrapers kissed the clouds and dreams were as big as the skyline, there stood a luxury restaurant named Leavitt's Table. It wasn't just any restaurant. It was an experience. The kind of place where waitstaff moved like dancers, plates looked like art, and every corner whispered elegance. People traveled from miles away to dine here, not just for the food but for the aura of exclusivity that surrounded it. Among the employees working at Leavitt's Table was a young woman who prided herself on being outspoken. She had strong opinions about life, politics, and everything in between. Her co-workers often teased her for turning coffee breaks into impromptu debates about social justice, healthcare reform, and why she believed conservatives were out of touch with reality. But despite her bold personality, she was good at what she did. Patrons might not always agree with her views, but they couldn't deny her charm or efficiency. This particular evening started like any other busy Friday night at the restaurant. The dining room buzzed with chatter, clinking glasses, and soft jazz music playing in the background. Tables were filled with well-dressed guests, business people celebrating deals, couples enjoying date nights, and tourists snapping photos of their meals. Amidst all this activity, one table caught the waitress's attention more than others. A lone woman sat by the window, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit that screamed success. Everything about her, from the way she held herself to the expensive watch on her wrist, screamed wealth and power. To the waitress, she looked like yet another privileged individual living in a bubble, completely disconnected from the struggles of everyday people. And honestly, that irritated her. As she approached the table to refill the water glass, something on the woman's phone screen caught her eye. A headline read, "Karoline Leavitt praises free market success." Without thinking twice, the waitress muttered under her breath loud enough for only herself to hear, or so she thought. Of course, another rich conservative trying to tell everyone how to live their lives. The woman glanced up, clearly amused rather than offended. There was no anger in her expression, just curiosity. "You seem passionate," she said with a smile. "Do you always judge your customers based on what they're reading?" Caught off guard, the waitress stumbled over her words. No, I mean, it's just... Come on, conservative policies don't exactly scream fairness, do they?" The woman chuckled lightly, unfazed by the comment. "Fairness is subjective, isn't it? Maybe we should talk more after dinner." The waitress shrugged it off, assuming the woman simply wanted to argue later. Little did she know, this seemingly casual conversation would soon turn her world upside down. The dinner rush at Leavitt's Table was finally winding down. The once bustling dining room now felt quieter, the clatter of dishes replaced by the soft hum of cleanup. Most of the staff had retreated to the back to catch their breath after a long night, but the waitress found herself being called into the manager's office. Her stomach tightened as she walked in, unsure of what awaited her. Sitting across from her, looking calm and composed, was the same woman from earlier, the one with the tailored suit and the expensive watch. Only this time, she wasn't scrolling through her phone or sipping wine. Instead, she was smiling faintly, almost like she was enjoying some private joke. The manager stood awkwardly beside her, clearly uncomfortable, before excusing himself and leaving the two alone. "Have a seat," the woman said, gesturing toward the chair. The waitress hesitated for a moment, but eventually sat down. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to get fired, or worse, publicly humiliated. After all, mocking a customer, especially one who looked as important as this woman, probably wasn't great for job security. "I want to start by saying I enjoyed our little chat earlier," the woman began, leaning back in her chair. "You're not afraid to speak your mind, and I appreciate that." The waitress blinked, confused. Was this really happening? Thanks?" she replied cautiously, unsure if sarcasm was hiding beneath the compliment. The woman chuckled, softly. "No need to be nervous, I'm Karoline Leavitt." She paused, letting the name sink in. When the waitress didn't react immediately, Karoline added, "I own this restaurant." It took a second for the words to register, but when they did, the waitress felt her face flush with embarrassment. Of course. The perfectly tailored suit, the expensive watch, the confident demeanor. It all made sense now. This wasn't just some random wealthy patron. It was the owner of the very place where she worked. And she'd mocked her right to her face. "Oh," the waitress managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't realize." Karoline raised a hand, cutting her off. "Relax. I'm not here to scold you or fire you. In fact, I think you might have something valuable to offer, if you're willing to listen." The waitress frowned, unsure of what to make of this. Was this some kind of trick? A test? Or maybe an attempt to teach her a lesson? Whatever it was, she couldn't deny that Karoline's tone was genuine. There was no malice in her voice, only curiosity. "You know," Karoline continued, "you mentioned fairness earlier. That's something we can both agree on, right? Everyone deserves a fair shot, but tell me, why do you assume conservatives are against that?" The question caught the waitress off guard. She hadn't expected this conversation to go beyond surface-level pleasantries. For a moment, she considered brushing it off with a vague answer, but something about Karoline's calm demeanor made her want to respond honestly. "Well," she started, choosing her words carefully, "it's just, a lot of conservative policies seem to favor the wealthy. Tax cuts for big corporations, cuts to social programs. It feels like they don't care about people struggling to get by." Karoline nodded thoughtfully as if she'd heard this argument before. "Interesting perspective," she said. "But let me ask you this. Have you ever considered working alongside someone like me to challenge those assumptions?" The waitress stared at her, dumbfounded. Was Karoline serious? Did she actually expect her, a liberal waitress who had openly criticized her beliefs, to collaborate with her? It sounded absurd, almost laughable. But then again, there was something intriguing about the idea. If nothing else, it would give her a chance to see things from a different angle. Before she could respond, Karoline stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. For now. "Think about it," she said with a smile. "We'll talk again, soon." As the waitress left the office, her mind raced with questions. What had just happened? Was this an opportunity or a trap? One thing was certain. Her world had just gotten a whole lot more complicated. The next few days at the restaurant felt surreal for the waitress. Every time she saw Karoline, whether she was greeting guests, inspecting the dining room, or chatting casually with the staff, she couldn't help but replay their conversation in her mind. It wasn't just embarrassment that lingered, it was curiosity. Who exactly was Karoline Leavitt? Sure, she owned one of the most prestigious restaurants in the city, but there had to be more to her than expensive suits and conservative ideals. One morning, as the waitress arrived early to set up for brunch service, she found herself face to face with Karoline again. This time, Karoline didn't wait for an invitation to talk. "How about you join me today?" she asked, gesturing toward the door. "I've got a few meetings lined up, and I think you might find them enlightening." The waitress hesitated. Was this some kind of punishment disguised as participation, or was Karoline genuinely interested in showing her something? Either way, saying no didn't seem like an option, not if she wanted to keep her job. So reluctantly, she agreed. They climbed into a sleek black car waiting outside the restaurant. The drive was quiet at first, the hum of the engine filling the silence between them. Finally, the waitress broke the tension. "So, where are we? Going?" Karoline glanced at her with a small smile. "You'll see." Their first stop was a community center tucked away in a part of the city the waitress rarely visited. From the outside, it looked unassuming, a modest brick building surrounded by a small parking lot. But inside, it buzzed with energy. Kids played basketball in the gym, volunteers helped adults fill out job applications, and a group of teenagers worked on laptops in a corner designated as a tech lab. "This place is funded by Leavitt's Table," Karoline explained as they walked. "Through the space, we use a portion of our profits to support programs like these, job training, mentorship, even coding classes for kids who wouldn't otherwise have access." The waitress stared around her, taken aback. She'd always assumed businesses like Leavitt's Table cared only about making money, not about giving back. Seeing it firsthand made her question how much she really knew, or didn't know, about people like Karoline. At the end of the tour, Karoline introduced her to the director of the center, a warm woman who spoke passionately about the impact of their partnership. Without Leavitt's table, she said, we wouldn't be able to do half of what we're doing here. Karoline's been a huge advocate for us. As they left the center, the waitress couldn't help but feel a little shaken. Maybe Karoline wasn't the stereotype she'd imagined, but that didn't mean she was ready to change her entire worldview, based on one visit. Their second stop was a networking event hosted by a local chamber of commerce. The room was packed with business owners, investors, and entrepreneurs, all exchanging ideas over coffee and pastries. Karoline navigated the crowd effortlessly, introducing the waitress to everyone they met. Some attendees were polite but distant, while others seemed genuinely interested in hearing her perspective as someone working in the hospitality industry. During a panel discussion, Karoline took the stage alongside other leaders to talk about creating opportunities for minority-owned businesses. Her points were clear and compelling. Leveling the playing field required effort from both sides, those with resources and those seeking them. The waitress listened intently, surprised by how much she agreed with what Karoline was saying. Afterward, during a break, she pulled Karoline aside. "Why are you showing me all this?" she asked bluntly. "What's the point?" Karoline studied her for a moment before answering. "Because I think you have potential. You care deeply about fairness and justice. That's obvious, but sometimes passion without understanding can lead to oversimplification. I want to show you that people aren't always who you assume they are." The waitress didn't respond right away. There was truth in what Karoline said, even if it stung a little. For years, she'd prided herself on seeing the world in black and white, good versus bad. But now shades of gray were starting to creep in, forcing her to rethink everything she thought she knew. By the time they returned to the restaurant late, that evening the waitress felt mentally exhausted, but also strangely inspired. Whatever game Karoline was playing, it was working. Slowly but surely, walls were coming down, replaced by questions and possibilities neither of them had expected. The days following the whirlwind tour with Karoline were a blur for the waitress. Her mind kept replaying everything she'd seen: the community center, the networking event, the passionate discussions about creating opportunities for underserved groups. It wasn't just the scale of Karoline's efforts that surprised her. It was the sincerity behind them. For years, the waitress had painted conservatives with a broad brush, assuming they only cared about protecting privilege and wealth. But now, cracks were forming in those assumptions. Back at the restaurant, life returned to its usual rhythm, or so it seemed on the surface. The waitress went through her shifts as normal, serving customers, balancing plates, and making small talk. But something inside her had shifted. She found herself watching Karoline more closely, noticing little things she hadn't before. Like how Karoline always made time to greet every staff member by name, or how she lingered after meetings to ask employees about their lives outside work. These weren't the actions of someone who saw people as pawns in a game of profit. They hinted at a deeper level of care. One afternoon, during a rare quiet moment, Karoline approached her while she was setting up tables for dinner service. "I've been thinking," Karoline said, leaning against a chair. "You mentioned fairness earlier, about wanting to make a difference. Have you ever thought about channeling that passion into action here?" The waitress frowned, unsure where this was going. "What do you mean?" "Well," Karoline continued, "Leavitt's table has a reputation for excellence, but we also have a platform. What if we use that platform to support causes you believe in? Maybe host events or fundraisers right here in the restaurant?" For a second, the waitress didn't respond. Was Karoline serious? Hosting charity events at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city sounded like a stretch. Who would show up? Would anyone even care? "I don't know," she admitted finally. "It sounds ambitious." Karoline smiled knowingly. "Ambition is what makes change happen. Why not give it a shot?" Over the next few weeks, the idea took shape. With Karoline's encouragement, the waitress began brainstorming ways to turn Leavitt's table into more than just a place to eat. It could become a hub for good, She proposed hosting monthly fundraisers, where a portion of the proceeds from each dinner would go toward local charities focused on education, job training, and housing assistance. To sweeten the deal, Karoline offered to personally match whatever amount was raised during these events. At first, skepticism ran high among the staff. Some co-workers doubted whether patrons would be interested in mixing fine dining with philanthropy. Others worried it might alienate the restaurant's wealthy clientele. But the waitress refused to let doubt derail her plans. If anything, the skepticism fueled her determination to prove them wrong. When the first fundraiser rolled around, nerves were high. The theme was a night for education, benefiting a nonprofit that provided scholarships to underprivileged students. Posters went up around the restaurant. Servers wore ribbons to promote the cause. And Karoline gave a brief speech at the start of the evening, explaining why supporting education mattered so much. To everyone's surprise, including the waitress, the event was a hit. Guests embraced the concept, happily donating extra money beyond their meal costs. By the end of the night, the total raised far exceeded expectations. And when Karoline announced she'd matched the donations, the room erupted in applause. As the final numbers came in, the waitress felt a rush of pride she hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't just about raising money. It was about proving that people from different walks of life could come together for a common goal. For once, her passion for fairness wasn't confined to arguments in the break room. It was turning into tangible results. Afterward, Karoline pulled her aside. "See?" she said with a grin. "Sometimes the best way to challenge assumptions is to act on them." The waitress nodded, still processing everything that had happened. "Yeah, but I couldn't have done it without your support. You trusted me when no one else did." Karoline's expression softened. "Leadership isn't about having all the answers, it's about empowering others to find their own. That's something I think we can both agree on." In that moment, something clicked. Their differences, political, ideological, generational, didn't disappear, but they started to feel less important. What mattered was the connection they'd built, rooted in mutual respect and shared purpose. For the first time, the waitress realized that collaboration didn't mean compromising your values. It meant finding new ways to live them out. And as she looked around the restaurant, glowing softly under the chandeliers, she knew this was only the beginning. The success of the first fundraiser sparked a wave of momentum that neither the waitress nor Karoline had anticipated. What started as a one-time experiment quickly turned into a regular feature at Leavitt's table. Each month, they picked a new cause to support: feeding the homeless, funding art programs in underserved schools, providing resources for single parents, and each time, the response was overwhelming. Patrons didn't just come for the food. They came because they wanted to be part of something bigger. The waitress threw herself into organizing these events with an energy she hadn't felt in years. She spent hours researching local charities, coordinating with volunteers, and designing flyers to promote the fundraisers. It wasn't easy juggling her regular duties as a server alongside her new role, but she didn't mind. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was making a real impact, not just talking about change, but actually creating it. Karoline watched all of this unfold with quiet pride. At first, she'd simply offered guidance, stepping in only when needed to smooth over logistics or approve budgets. But as the months went by, she began taking a more active role, attending planning meetings, and even pitching ideas of her own. The two women worked surprisingly well together, their differing perspectives complementing each other rather than clashing. Where the waitress brought passion and creativity, Karoline added structure and strategy. Together, they made an unlikely but effective team. One evening, after wrapping up another successful event, the waitress found herself sitting across from Karoline in the restaurant's private dining room. The space was quiet now, the last guests having left hours ago, leaving behind only the faint scent of roasted garlic and freshly baked bread. They were going over numbers from the night, a record-breaking amount raised. But the conversation soon veered into deeper territory. "You've changed," Karoline said suddenly, breaking the silence. Not just professionally, but personally. I can see it. The waitress looked up, surprised. What do you mean? Well, Karoline explained, leaning back in her chair. When we first met, you were quick to judge me. Quick to write me off based on my politics. Now, you seem open, like you're willing to listen even if you don't always agree. The waitress hesitated before responding. It was true. She had changed. Working so closely with Karoline had forced her to confront her own biases, to question the rigid line she'd drawn between us and them. She still believed fiercely in her values, but she no longer saw them as mutually exclusive from someone else's perspective. I guess I realized that fairness isn't a monopoly, she admitted finally. It doesn't belong to one side or the other. It's something we all have to work toward, together. Karoline smiled, clearly pleased with the answer. Exactly. And that's why what we're doing here matters. We're showing people that collaboration is possible, even necessary, if we want to make progress. But not everyone shared their enthusiasm. As word spread about Leavitt's Table's philanthropic efforts, criticism began to trickle in. Some longtime patrons grumbled that the restaurant was becoming too political, while others accused it of virtue signaling. Online reviews reflected the divide. Glowing praise from those who loved the fundraisers sat alongside scathing comments from critics who thought the concept was out of place in such an upscale setting. The backlash hit hard, especially for the waitress. She'd poured her heart into these events, believing wholeheartedly in their purpose. Hearing people dismiss them as gimmicks stung more than she cared to admit. One particularly harsh review called the fundraisers a desperate attempt to stay relevant in a woke world, and she couldn't help but feel defensive. When she brought the issue to Karoline, expecting sympathy, she was surprised by the calmness in Karoline's response. Criticism comes with the territory, Karoline said matter-of-factly. If you try to please everyone, you'll end up pleasing no one. The question is, are we staying true to our mission? The waitress thought about it for a moment. Despite the negativity, the fundraisers were achieving their goals, raising money, raising awareness, and bringing people together. That had to count for something, right? I think so, she replied, her voice steadier than before. We're doing good work. Let them say what they want. Karoline nodded approvingly. Good. Don't let fear of judgment stop you from doing what's right. Their resolve paid off in unexpected ways. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. Positive media coverage helped counteract the negative reviews, highlighting the tangible impact of the fundraisers. Local news stations ran segments featuring interviews with beneficiaries, students who'd received scholarships, families who'd been lifted out of homelessness, artists whose careers had been jump-started thanks to grants. Suddenly, Leavitt's Table wasn't just known for its food, it was known for its heart. Employees noticed the shift too. Morale soared as staff members took pride in being part of something meaningful. Even skeptics within the team warmed up to the idea, volunteering to help organize future events or suggesting causes close to their own hearts. The restaurant became more than just a workplace. It became a community. For the waitress, the transformation was profound. She'd walked into Leavitt's Table as someone eager to challenge the status quo, armed with opinions but little experience beyond rhetoric. Now she was learning how to channel her ideals into action, proving to herself and others that change was possible, even in the unlikeliest of places. And through it all, her relationship with Karoline continued to evolve. Their partnership proved that differences didn't have to divide. They could inspire growth instead. By listening to each other, challenging each other, and trusting each other, they'd created something extraordinary. A bridge where none had existed before. As the weeks turned into months, one thing became clear. This was just the beginning of a much larger journey. As the months rolled on, the fundraisers at Leavitt's Table became more than just monthly events. They turned into a movement. Word spread far beyond the restaurant's walls, drawing attention from people who had never set foot inside its doors. Local newspapers wrote glowing features about how a luxury dining spot was making waves in the community. Social media buzzed with photos of patrons holding up signs that read, "Dining for Good," and hashtags like fairness on the menu began trending in the city. But it wasn't just the publicity that kept things humming. It was the ripple effect. The waitress noticed small but meaningful changes happening around her. Strangers would approach her during shifts to thank her for organizing the events, saying they donated online because they couldn't attend in person. One older gentleman, a regular customer, pulled her aside one evening to share how he'd started volunteering at a shelter after learning about their fundraiser for the homeless. "You're inspiring people to do better," he said earnestly. It was moments like these that made all the hard work feel worth it. Still, there were challenges. Moments when doubt crept back in and tested her resolve. Some nights, after a long shift or a particularly tough day, she wondered if any of this truly mattered. Was she really making a difference, or was it just a drop in the ocean? Karoline seemed to sense when those doubts surfaced. She didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. Instead, she'd remind her of the bigger picture. "Change doesn't happen overnight," Karoline once told her during a quiet moment in the kitchen. "It's messy, imperfect, and slow, but every step forward counts, even the smallest ones." Those words stuck with her. Slowly, she began to see the fundraisers, not as grand gestures meant to solve everything at once, but as stepping stones toward something greater. Each event planted seeds of hope, and while she might not see all of them grow immediately, she trusted they would someday. One evening, as the restaurant prepared for yet another fundraiser, a surprise visitor arrived. It was the director of the nonprofit they'd supported during their very first event, the one focused on scholarships for underprivileged students. She walked in carrying a large envelope. Her face lit up with excitement. "I wanted to personally deliver this," she said, handing the envelope to the waitress. Inside were handwritten letters from students whose lives had been transformed by the scholarship money raised at Leavitt's table. One letter stood out, a young woman named Maria, who wrote about how the scholarship allowed her to pursue a degree in engineering despite financial struggles. "Because of you," Maria wrote, "I can dream bigger than I ever thought possible." Tears welled up in the waitress's eyes as she read the note. For so long, she'd doubted whether her efforts could make a real impact. Now, holding proof in her hands, she realized the truth. Even small actions could spark big change. Karoline watched silently from across the room, a soft smile playing on her lips. When the waitress looked up, catching her gaze, Karoline gave a subtle nod of approval. No words were needed. It was clear they both understood the significance of the moment. With each passing fundraiser, the bond between the waitress and Karoline grew stronger. They weren't just employer and employee anymore. They were partners in a shared mission. Their differences still existed. Political debates occasionally flared up in the break room, but they no longer felt like barriers. Instead, they fueled deeper conversations, pushing both women to think critically and expand their perspectives. One afternoon, as they sat going over plans for an upcoming event, the waitress decided to broach a topic that had been on her mind for weeks. "Do you ever think we're asking too much of ourselves?" she asked hesitantly. "Trying to balance running a business, helping the community, and staying true to our values. Isn't that a lot?" Karoline chuckled softly, setting down her pen. "Of course it's a lot. But here's the thing. Life is complicated. People are complicated. If we waited for perfect conditions to act, we'd never get anything done. What matters is that we keep showing up, even when it's hard." Her response hit home. The waitress realized that perfection wasn't the goal, progress was. And progress didn't have to look flashy or dramatic. Sometimes it looked like two people from opposite sides of the aisle coming together to create something beautiful. By the end of the year, the fundraisers had raised enough money to fund several major initiatives, including a new art program for underserved youth and a housing project for single mothers. To celebrate, Karoline suggested hosting a special gala at the restaurant, an evening dedicated to honoring everyone who had contributed to their efforts. The night of the gala arrived, and the restaurant was transformed. Twinkling fairy lights hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over tables adorned with fresh flowers. Guests mingled happily, sharing stories and laughter. At the center of it all stood the waitress, dressed in a simple yet elegant outfit, greeting attendees with a mix of pride and humility. When it came time for speeches, Karoline took the stage first. She spoke briefly about the journey they'd been on, the challenges faced, the lessons learned, and the friendships forged along the way. Then she handed the microphone to the waitress. Standing under the spotlight, the waitress felt a lump rise in her throat. She scanned the room, taking in the faces of co-workers, donors, volunteers, and beneficiaries. So many lives had intersected because of this crazy idea she'd helped bring to life. "Thank you," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "A year ago, I didn't know what I was doing. Honestly, I wasn't sure anyone would care about these events. But you proved me wrong. You showed up, not just with your wallets, but with your hearts. And because of that, we've been able to make a difference." She paused, glancing toward Karoline, who gave her an encouraging smile. "This hasn't been easy," she continued. "We've faced criticism, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But through it all, we've stayed true to our mission. We've shown that fairness isn't about politics, it's about humanity. And that's something worth fighting for." The room erupted into applause, and for the first time in a long time, she felt completely at peace. This wasn't just her victory. It belonged to everyone who had believed in the power of possibility. As the night drew to a close, the waitress found herself standing outside the restaurant, gazing up at the stars. Karoline joined her a few minutes later, holding 2 cups of coffee. "To the future," Karoline said, raising her cup in a toast. "To the future," the waitress echoed, clinking her cup against Karoline's. In that moment, surrounded by the hum of the city and the promise of tomorrow, she knew they were only getting started. Months turned into years, and what had started as a series of fundraisers at Leavitt's table blossomed into something far greater, a legacy. The restaurant became more than just a place to dine. It became a symbol of unity in a divided world. People from all walks of life flocked there, not just for the food but for the sense of purpose that permeated every corner of the establishment. It was proof that even the unlikeliest partnerships could spark meaningful change. The waitress, now an integral part of the restaurant's leadership team, found herself reflecting on how much her life had transformed since that fateful night when she'd mocked Karoline without realizing who she was. Back then, she'd been quick to judge, eager to label anyone with differing beliefs as the enemy. But working alongside Karoline had taught her something invaluable. People are rarely as one-dimensional as we assume them to be. One crisp autumn morning, as sunlight streamed through the windows of the restaurant, the waitress stood near the MOCKS entrance, overseeing preparations for another busy day. Karoline walked in, looking as polished as ever but with a hint of nostalgia in her eyes. They exchanged a glance, wordlessly acknowledging how far they'd come together. "You know," Karoline said after a moment, breaking the silence, "I never expected any of this when I first met you." The waitress laughed softly. "Me neither. Honestly, I thought you were going to fire me that night." Karoline chuckled, shaking her head. "And miss out on everything we've built? Never. You challenged me in ways I needed, ways I didn't even realize at the time." It was true. Their partnership hadn't always been smooth sailing. There had been disagreements, moments of frustration, and plenty of compromises along the way. But those challenges had only strengthened their bond, teaching them both the importance of listening, patience, and mutual respect. That same year, Leavitt's Table launched its most ambitious project yet, a community center entirely funded by proceeds from the fundraisers. Located in a neighborhood often overlooked by developers and policymakers, the center offered free workshops, job training programs, and recreational activities for residents of all ages. Its grand opening drew hundreds of attendees, including local politicians, business leaders, and media outlets eager to cover the story. Standing on stage during the ribbon-cutting ceremony, the waitress felt a surge of pride unlike anything she'd experienced before. Beside her, Karoline delivered a heartfelt speech about the power of collaboration and the importance of giving back to the community. When it was her turn to speak, the waitress took a deep breath and addressed the crowd. "When we started these fundraisers, I never imagined they'd lead us here," she began, her voice steady despite the weight of emotion behind it. "But the truth is, none of this would have been possible without teamwork, without people coming together despite their differences to work toward a common goal. This center isn't just bricks and mortar. It's hope. It's proof that when we listen to each other and focus on what truly matters, we can achieve incredible things." As applause filled the air, she scanned the audience, catching glimpses of familiar faces, staff members who had worked tirelessly to make this dream a reality, volunteers who had poured their hearts into the cause, and beneficiaries whose lives had already begun to change because of it. For the first time in her life, she fully understood the meaning of collective impact. In the months that followed, the community center quickly became a hub of activity. Kids gathered in the art room to paint murals inspired by their dreams. Adults attended classes to learn new skills, and seniors played chess in the cozy lounge area. Every corner buzzed with energy and possibility, a testament to the hard work and vision that had brought it to life. Meanwhile, Leavitt's table continued to thrive, its reputation reaching new heights. Critics who had once dismissed the fundraisers as mere publicity stunts now praised the restaurant for setting an example of corporate responsibility. Even skeptics within the staff admitted that the initiatives had reignited their passion for their work, reminding them why they'd chosen this industry in the first place. For the waitress, the journey had been transformative, not just professionally, but personally. She no longer saw the world in black and white terms, where ideologies clashed and compromise seemed impossible. Instead, she embraced the gray areas, recognizing that growth often comes from discomfort and dialogue. Her relationship with Karoline remained a cornerstone of her life, a reminder that connection transcends labels and assumptions. Years later, as the waitress prepared to step into a new role, leading a nonprofit organization dedicated to expanding similar community centers across the country, she reflected on the lessons she'd learned. Success wasn't measured by accolades or wealth, but by the lives touched and the bridges built. And while she and Karoline still didn't agree on everything politically, their shared commitment to fairness and humanity had forged a friendship stronger than any divide. On her final day at Leavitt's table, Karoline presented her with a small gift. A framed photo of the two of them standing outside the community center on its opening day. Beneath it was an inscription: "To fairness, friendship, and the courage to challenge assumptions." Tears welled up in her eyes as she hugged Karoline tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Karoline smiled warmly. "No, thank you. You reminded me that progress is possible when we dare to trust each other." As she walked away from the restaurant for the last time, the waitress knew she carried more than memories with her. She carried a mission, a belief that even in a fractured world, kindness and collaboration could pave the way forward. And somewhere, deep down, she knew that wherever life took her next, the spirit of Leavitt's table would always remain a part of her.